$1 billion. That's our goal. And then we greenfielded the Northeast in August of 2018. We had probably about $7 million worth of business. We opened up in Bethlehem, PA with 85,000 square feet and $1.5 million worth of inventory and 2 53-foot trucks. I remember walking through the warehouse and just looking around and going to myself, wow, what did I get myself into? Now I've got to actually sell this stuff.
Welcome to The Profitable Table, fed by Woolco Foods, a podcast at the nexus of hospitality, business, culture, and the mind. Now here's your host, Woolco Foods CEO, Stephen Toberoff.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of The Profitable Table, fed by Woolco Foods. I am your host, Stephen Toberoff, and today I am very much looking forward to my conversation because it's going to involve a subject that I'm very passionate about, which is sales, and we may branch off beyond that. But my guest is someone that's going to really have a tremendous amount of insight and wisdom. So without further ado, let me jump into it. My guest today is Mike Mirachi. He is the Vice President of Sales for Schinner. He is an author, and he is the host of the Toilet Paper Salesman podcast. And Mike, I'm really looking forward to our discussion today. Thank you for coming in. Really very nice of you.
I'm thrilled to be here and looking forward to a great discussion.
So, Mike, I have a lot of different areas that I would love to explore with you. But before we get into it, can you just give us a little background on yourself, how it was that you got into sales, and then ultimately how it was that you found yourself at Schinner?
Sure. It's quite a story. I started off in the restaurant business as a teenager, cooking in restaurants. And then in 8th grade, I made a decision that truly changed my life. And that was whether to go to college or whether to take a VOTech track. And I decided to take a VOTech track into food prep. And when I did that, the next thing that happened was I remember being in a math class and they're like, well, I guess we're going to have to teach you guys how to do a checkbook. In other words, you made a bad decision and you're a loser and you'll always be a loser. And through high school, I took that track of VOTech, not understanding the consequences because my parents never went to college, nor did my brothers. And so in 11th grade or 12th grade, I remember telling the science teacher that I wanted to go to college. And if you saw the look on her face, it was horrifying because she understood that through the VOTech track, you get general math, general science. You had no preparation for college. And so I didn't know any better. So I actually went to universities and went for visits. And the one university I went to, I sat down with the admissions counselor and they looked at my transcript and they're like, I can't believe you got out of high school with this transcript. Right? But undeterred, and sometimes not knowing is good. I went to a college up in north of Scranton called Keystone Junior College, who focused on kids like me. And they had a hotel and restaurant management program, 2 years. And that's what I did. And they actually had a wrestling program. I was a wrestler in high school and I wrestled in college. And so I went through the food preparation or hotel restaurant management program. And then when I was interviewing, I had a job lined up with a company called M.W. Wood, which is now Sodexo, in management. There was an interview with a company called Made-Right Steak Company. You may know them, Portion Control Meats, where I wasn't going to go on an interview because it was an interview for sales. But my professor encouraged me to go on the interview as a test. She said, just go on it, try it for practice. And I did. And I found myself really interested in the position. So the next thing we did is we went on a plant tour with, I think, about 4 other people. We go on the plant tour. It was great. After the plant tour is a Saturday afternoon, I'm laying on the couch, just hanging out with my dad. And I decided to get up and write a handwritten thank you note to the owner of the company. Dear Mr. Bernstein, thank you for the tour. I think I can do a great job. And sent off the letter. 2 weeks later, got a call from him. I got the job. And the reason why I got the job is because I was the only one to write a handwritten thank you note. I still say to this day, the value of handwritten thank you notes, it's invaluable. And especially today with all the digital age that we have.
I completely agree.
Yeah, handwritten thank you notes, incredible. So I worked there for 3 years as a portion control meat specialist, just doing rides with salespeople. And then I was leaving on Sunday and coming back on Thursdays. I happened to meet my wife at Made-Right, and we were getting married. that type of life where you're traveling 6 days a week is not the best. So one of my friends at college had a position available at Marstan Industries, which was at that time $125 million non-foods distributor, equipment and supplies and janitorials. And so I started a position with there. I remember interviewing with a gentleman named Stu Cohen, who is, I think he may be retired at this point, but they had just hired a young person, didn't work out. They're very kind of hesitant to hire me, but they took the step forward. And I got my price book and not much training. As you know, back then you didn't have a lot of training. And I went out and just started opening new accounts. It just seemed pretty easy to me, you know? And so I grew the business with them 30% for 3 years. And then I made less money the third year than the year before. And so I decided that it was time to make a change. And that's when I went with Huff Paper Company in 1988, which was a redistributor of paper and janitorials, which is the business I'm in today. So I worked there for 30 years. I had a 1-year hiatus as a business coach, which was a good learning experience. It was a very expensive learning experience, but that's okay. It almost cost me my marriage, but again, good learning experience. And Huff, after a year, called me back to come back as sales manager. And so my wife was thrilled, and I was able to get out from under the business, which is quite frankly a miracle. And so I went back to Huff and toiled for another 13 years as sales manager, and I had my own territory. And then we knew the folks from R.J. Schinner, who was mostly a Midwest company at that time, and they were expanding into the Northeast. So Ken Schinner, the owner, we were on a trip or I don't remember exactly where we were, but he asked me if I wanted to come to work for them to lead the charge for the Northeast. And for me, it was a great challenge, even though I was in my mid-50s at the time. I had a lot of tread on my tires because I was a large tree in a small pot, right? Because Huff was a great company, but they were not growth-minded at all. If they were happy, if they grew a couple of % a year, that's who they were, and that's okay, right? So the challenge was move over to Huff in 2017. I have a 1-year non-compete, and Huff obviously was not happy about me moving over. So they challenged it. The 2 weeks that I took between when I put my notice in and when I actually started with RJ were 2 of the hardest weeks of my life because they put a lot of pressure on me to try to get me not to go over, including cease and desist letters. And
sure.
Yeah. So I finally decided to go. And of course, at that point, we're committed. And I had a 1-year non-compete, which meant I traveled around the country. I developed a training program called Selling the RJ Way, a sales training program, which actually I'm firing back up. It's a 15-week.
And you guys do over $700 million in revenue at RJ, correct?
Yeah, we do. Heading towards $1 billion. That's our goal. And then we greenfielded the Northeast in August of 2018. We had probably about $7 million worth of business. We opened up in Bethlehem, PA with 85,000 square feet and $1.5 million worth of inventory and 2 53-foot trucks.
253?
That's it. Yeah. I remember walking through the warehouse and just looking around and going to myself, and this happens. Wow, what did I get myself into? Now I've got to actually sell this.
How exciting, though.
Yeah.
I mean, that's a great story. So they made all that upfront investment just believing, and you had to lead that charge.
Yeah. And that's who they are. They hire really good people. They don't micromanage you, and they believe in you, and they truly do.
Very impressive. I love stories of that type of scaling, and, $700 million in revenue is obviously impressive. There's a lot in your introduction that interested me. I am very much fascinated by sales because, one, I think it's the most important part of business. There's an old saying, nothing happens until someone sells something. But even sort of dissecting sales, to be effective and to be great as a salesperson requires so many attributes. It requires really self-mastery. It requires high-level psychological skills. It requires organizational skills. It requires tenacity and all of that. So the first question I have is, at your job before Huff, you had said that acquiring customers came easy to you. Can you talk a little bit more about what made it easy? Were you just very comfortable about introducing yourself to people you'd never met before? Was it that you were able to sort of analyze the market and see where your value proposition was? What made it easy? Because so many people don't find it easy, even great salespeople at the beginning.
And making cold calls is not easy. And maybe I misstated that in somewhat. It was easy from the standpoint of I went out and made sales calls and picked up accounts. That came easy. And I don't understand it, frankly. When I started with Huff Paper the first day, I picked up my company car. My wife took a picture of me and I drove to New Jersey. I didn't even know where I was going. I pulled off Wharton. You know where Wharton, New Jersey is?
Sure.
Yeah. So I pull off Wharton, New Jersey exit. I make a left and I make a right. And there's a company that's, I don't believe is in business any longer, called Sealand Specialties, which did wholesale paper. And so I went in and made a cold call. And they must have felt bad for me. I don't know if they felt bad for me. I don't know what they were thinking, but they gave me an order. I got a new distributor, first sales call I made. I call up the president of the company. His name was Phil Sullivan, an incredible human being. And I talked to customer service. Her name was Barb. And I said, hey, Barb, can I talk to Phil? And Barb said, hey, Phil, Mike's on the phone. And he goes, Mike who? Because I was so new with the company, he didn't even remember, So I talked to Phil and I said, hey, Phil, I got a new account. He's like, you got what? And I said, I got a new account. He goes, what do you mean you got a new account? I said, yeah, I made a sales call and I got a new account. And he was flabbergasted because you don't pick up wholesale distributors with making one cold call. And he's like, are you sure they're going to pay their bills? Like,
right, natural stuff they would ask.
Yeah.
So let me ask you this, Mike, because you have a lot of experience in sales management as well.
Sure.
And I have my own thoughts on this, but I would like to hear your thoughts. When a company onboards a new sales rep, how much do you think it is necessary? In other words, if you hire a new sales rep that's really gung-ho and ready to get out there, and they haven't really got tremendous mastery of what they're selling yet, because in businesses such as yours and what we do at Wilco, we have 10,000 items. We're dealing with chefs, pastry chefs, mixologists. It's very difficult to be expert in things. What is your sort of suggestion about when is it time and what is the best way to get a new sales hire out in the field and being constructive? What are your thoughts about that process?
It's a great question. And I'm dealing with it right now because I'm actually bringing my son into the business. He lives right in Metro New York and he's going to cover the Metro New York market for us, one of the hardest markets in the country. And when I brought it up to him, he said, I don't know any different, Dad. I'm going to go out and make sales calls. I don't know what's hard or what's easy. So to answer your question, though, he's a musician. So he worked as a musician. He graduated with a master's degree in jazz studies. He's an incredible jazz saxophonist. But you send out 100 emails and you get a gig and it pays you $100. And he was a little tired of that. He was tired of that grind where he was doing teaching and playing gigs. And he had a design business where he's designing logos and doing that kind of work. He made it work. But it's a lot of work for a little bit and no health insurance and all that. So he decides now that he wants to come into the business. He doesn't have a base of knowledge other than growing up in the house and having that knowledge. But there's going to be a lot of work to do.
But you just said something that shows he has a little bit of knowledge, which is he's comfortable sending out 100 emails to get one response.
Right. Yeah, and that's important.
Very important.
And he actually, the way that came about is I got a call from a broker friend of mine who just picked up a line in Metro New York and decided that he needed somebody. And he's like, do you know of anybody? And at that point, I wasn't even thinking of my son to come into the business. And finally, he's like, I need somebody young. I need somebody. And I said, I could ask my son, maybe. And he decided to take the interview. A half an hour before the first interview, he calls me and he goes, hey, Dad, I got an interview in a half an hour. I said, okay, are you prepared? What are you going to ask? And he starts ripping this stuff off. He obviously did his homework, went through the whole website of the line that he was going to be representing.
So now he's demonstrating another key attribute of sales, which is preparation for a visit.
Correct.
Preparation for the call.
Preparation equals confidence, right?
Third aspect, which I was just going to talk about, because such a key thing in sales is the transference of confidence.
That's correct.
But you can't transfer what you don't have.
That's correct. So he killed the interview, just absolutely destroyed it. Then he got a second interview. He went in and did some site visits with them. They said he did an incredible job. The owner of the brokerage called me, goes, man, I think the world of your son. Really cool. So it ends up, he doesn't get the job, right? Because somebody else came in with 20 years experience and actually got the job, right? He was devastated. But what it did is it lit its fire for the business. And he is like, you know what? I could really believe I can do this. And then that started discussions with us because I've been looking for someone for the New York metro market. And one thing led to another, and he starts on Monday.
So you touched on a lot of things there that I kind of view as essential. I forget who it was that originated the phrase, but the phrase is great salespeople are not trained. Great salespeople are born and then trained. And I've given that a lot of thought, and I've found in my career, having worked with a lot of salespeople, having had a number of sales managers work for me, that there's a lot of truth in that. But what you're describing, I think in our industry in particular, the approach that I take to sales and when I speak to my sales team is, first and foremost, I want them to always represent only truthful things, because one, it goes to confidence. And two, the nature of our business is we have multiple touches a week with our customers. It's not a one-time sale. So don't ever represent something you can't back up. And by only representing what you can, it gives you the confidence. But then I also like what you were saying, and I think it's so crucial, particularly when it involves upselling. Go into every meeting with an existing customer, whatever the reason for it, a monthly review, they have an issue, they have a question. Go in there prepared to offer them something of value. Or to even put it differently, I think every interaction, whether it's with an existing customer or a prospect, should have a value-oriented proposition embedded in that conversation.
Right.
What do you think about that?
So the way I put it is, what's your purpose? Why are you making a sales call? What are you doing walking into that account? And what's your goal and what's your purpose for that account? There's a company, and I won't say their name, they have a slogan on the side of their truck. You may have seen it. Success through customer satisfaction. It's a fair enough statement, right? But I think that's a wrong statement, because I think that's centered in the distributor's world. I think you should switch those two words around. Satisfaction through customer success. So what's your goal is to help the customer be successful. So every sales call you make, my goal is to help my customers be successful and help them grow their business and help them to be successful, because you could satisfy a customer right out of business.
You're absolutely right. It's a great observation. And so much of what I keep focusing on with my sales manager and the sales team, I join the sales meetings. We have a weekly sales meeting, which we do by Zoom most of the time, sometimes in person. And then we have one-on-one meetings, which the manager does. But the main thing I've been sort of focusing on lately is sales requires a lot if you're going to be high level. And one of them is to prime and focus your mind, your attention, your energy towards your objective. And what you just said really resonates with me, which is if your focus and intention, and you can convey this, that look, I'm here to bring value to your business. I'm here to listen. I'm here to understand where, we can help, where we can contribute. And I think if you approach it from that perspective, it really lays a foundation for long-term success. And I think it also drives the attention and behavior of the sales rep in a constructive way. Because what you don't want in sales is people spending a lot of time doing nothing. Sales is a results-oriented business.
Right.
And I think a big way you get those results is through that focus. So let me ask you this question. When you're managing your team and when you've managed your team in the past, what is your approach if you see either the entire team or a few reps that are not hitting the numbers that you believe they could or should? You know the market is good. You know that other members of the exact same sales team are hitting their numbers and blowing them out. Yet you've got a few people, same company, same market, same all exogenous factors, they're underperforming. How do you deal with that?
Well, you want to give them every opportunity to succeed. If they refuse to succeed, once you know, they've got to go.
Now, let me ask you, I agree with you there. What do you think the most common reason is for people that don't succeed in that environment?
It's a great question. I don't think there's one answer. I think that when you hire salespeople, it's very challenging to find the right ones. The one thing that you look for is, and the one thing I stress is consistency. Consistency breeds confidence. Confidence breeds trust. Trust develops a relationship. Okay. And you have to be able to go in and consistently go to your customers and show them right from the start. So when you talk about opening new customers and you say, what's the key to opening new customers? Consistency. What does that mean? That means being on time. That means when you say you're going to send them something, you send it to them. That means when you need a sample, you get it to them. That means you follow up, you show up, and you do all those things consistently. And then what happens is the buyer starts to say to themselves, this person, they're consistent. I can trust them. They build confidence. Because in the beginning, they don't know you. They don't know Wilco Foods. They don't know RJ Schinner. They know that salesperson who represents you. And if they can trust that salesperson, then they'll trust the company. But you've got to get from point A to point B, and it starts with consistency. So the reps that are not doing it, what I find is they're not consistently either following through or showing up or following up. I have a formula. What's a successful salesperson look like? 50% of a successful salesperson is showing up and following up. 25%, likable and credible. So if you show up, follow up, you're likable and you're credible. That's 75% of a top salesperson. The rest is knowledge. The rest are the intangible things.
I like that. And I think you're right. When you talk about consistency, I think consistency is the linchpin to success in anything in life. And certainly business. Because anybody can show up and work hard when they feel like it, or when their mood suits them, or the weather's nice. But there's no substitute for the cumulative benefit of attacking a situation consistently. And I always like to say, we all have those days. We didn't sleep great. We got a couple of distractions, blah, blah, blah. 75% is better than zero. And I think that the people who refuse to have those 0 days, it's raining out, you don't feel like it, blah, 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 but you hit the number of cold calls you say you're going to hit, or you follow up. You may not see the success the first time, but if you're the person who does that week in and week out, you will see success. And you'll definitely take business from the people who don't do it, because it is a competitive thing. I think you're right. And then the likability. So let's talk about that a little bit, because I think it's a great point. And I think it's an important point, because if somebody is absolutely turned off by another person's personality, it's very difficult to overcome that. Are there any things that salespeople can do, in your observation, to enhance their likability metric? Conscious decisions or actions they can take?
The more interested you are, the more interesting you'll be. Okay? The best salespeople are the ones that listen, and they don't have all the answers, and they want to understand, and they're curious. So one of my podcast episodes, I talk about sales basics. What are the basics of sales, right? And it's things like listening. It's things like asking questions. It's curiosity. It's those things, because the worst salespeople and the ones that are least attractive are the ones that know everything. Selling is not telling, right? Selling is learning. And selling is understanding the needs of your customer so that you can take the tool belt that you have with whatever company you're with and utilize that tool belt to help your customer be successful.
It's a great answer, and I really want to underscore it for our audience, because you actually answered the question perfectly, in my view, which is the following. To be successful in sales and to be likable, it starts by being truly interested in the prospect and listening first and asking questions. One of my favorite books, one of the most important books I've ever read, is How to Win Friends and Influence People, Dale Carnegie. And he goes into this in depth, and it's a great book, and I recommend it to everybody. But you hit the nail right on the head. If you're a salesman and you want to be likable, start by asking questions, start by being an active listener, and understand who you're speaking with. Don't feel that you have to be the center of attention. That's how you become unlikable. It's a great point.
Very much
so. What I find is that the best way to put oneself as a salesperson in that position is to be able to ask what I like to call impactful questions, because the questions are going to really drive the dynamic. When it comes to new business, how do you suggest a sales rep approach the prospect to start to cultivate that dynamic? Are there any sort of, perhaps it's a formula, perhaps it's things you've seen that have worked, but what are some suggestions you have about how a sales rep can break the ice with a new prospect?
Yeah, it's a great question. First of all, back to Dale Carnegie. I actually took his course. And I sent 5 of my salespeople through his course last year, and I've got another 5 going through this year.
Well, Warren Buffett said it was the most important thing he ever did for his success was take a Dale Carnegie course. Billionaire investor Strauss Zelnick, who used to be head of, I think it was Paramount Films, he's now got his own media company. I would be shocked if there are any truly successful CEOs or business people who have not read that book, because it really explains everything beautifully. And it's true. If you will simply get in the habit of making the other person the focus, because Dale Carnegie teaches what people are really interested in is themselves. And when you're selling somebody, they're very much interested in themselves. Like, for example, one of the things that I always encourage my salespeople to be mindful of is that for our business, Wilco, because we're a service, there can be a multitude of pain points that a prospect may have. They may be unhappy with the price they're paying. They may be unhappy that the truck shows up at a time they don't want. They may be unhappy with the quality of the product. They may be unhappy with their salesman's follow-up, whatever it is. And if you're a sales rep and you lead with price for a customer whose pain point is delivery time, you've blown it. So that leads me back to the question I was going to ask you before we got into Dale Carnegie, which is your suggested approach with new business and prospects and how to sort of make that meaningful interaction.
Thank you for bringing me back around.
No, I appreciate that. No, because I could get into that whole subject too.
Yeah. So whenever you make a cold call, there's a process. Okay. What I like to do is, first of all, understand that business as much as I possibly can. So if there's a prospect that I have, I'll bring it back down to the level of a street DSR salesperson. Okay. You're driving down the street and you see an account that you want to call on that you think is a good prospect. Let's just say it's a restaurant. So what would I do? The first thing I would do is I'd go to eat there. As a matter of fact, I'd probably go eat there 2 or 3 times before I would even do anything, before I would even call on them. I want to understand what's going on in that restaurant. And I would sit right at the counter, and so I could look into the kitchen, and I'm going to watch, and I'm going to observe, and I'm going to eat stuff off the menu, and I want to see how clean it is. And I want to see the things that are going on in that restaurant and understand it. Okay. Then I'm going to go on their website, and then I'm going to scour it and see what I can find out about that company as much as I possibly can. I want to download their menu and see what that looks like. I want to analyze everything that's on their menu. I'm going to order a takeout. I want to see what kind of packaging I'm going to get. Right? All those things get you prepared to understand that business intimately, so that when you go and make a sales call on that customer, then it's going to be impactful because you're going to know exactly what the issues are before you even go in. And the owner is going to know you did your homework because, and I'll give you an example. I was making a sales call with one of my distributor customers, and we were calling on a restaurant. So before I went in, and they were interested in packaging ideas. So that was the premise of the call. I went on their website. I printed off their menu. It was horrible. I mean, if you printed off this menu, it was unorganized. It didn't look right. I'll just leave it there. So I printed off a copy. I walked in to the sales call, and I got introduced, and I said, "Can I ask you a question?" And he said, "Yes." "Have you downloaded your menu from your website recently?" "No." So I handed it to him. And I said, "I went on your website and I printed off your menu, and I'm not sure if you're aware, but this is what I got." And they're like, "Oh my gosh, that was supposed to be done 6 months ago." And the person who was supposed to do it never did what they were supposed to do. And he's like, "Wow, I really appreciate you doing that for me. You really helped me out." Now, what do you think happened for the rest of the call? I just built a huge amount of credibility with that customer because before we did anything, I helped solve a problem in his business that he wasn't even aware of.
It's an excellent point. And I also like your emphasis on research before going into a place, because I think that you want to take control of everything that's within your control to maximize the probability of success. And one of the things that's absolutely in a sales rep's control, whether it's a new prospect or an upselling visit, is to do your homework and be prepared. People don't like it if you're not prepared. If you are prepared, you can have a big impact. And then your emphasis on creating value is also tremendous. So now let's spin this out a little bit, because one of the opportunities that exists in my business, and I know it does in yours as well, is, as I said, we have over 10,000 items. and we have a lot of different customers. And one of the opportunities, great opportunities we have, is to get as much wallet share as we can from each customer. And the way that I frame that with our sales team is, look, if you have a customer that's buying from you consistently, we owe them a lot. We Woolco owe them a lot. And one of the things we owe them is to be their eyes and ears in the market. So we owe it to them to go to them. What will happen is, let's say we have a customer that buys their produce and their dairy and their meat from us, but they're not buying any of their groceries. And a sales rep goes, well, my brother-in-law works for U.S. Foods. So, what I tell them to do is say, look, I appreciate that and I appreciate loyalty. But you know what? Let me just fax you every other week what our pricing would be. This way you have visibility into the market. Whether you buy from me or not, I owe that to you as a customer. What are your thoughts in terms of the whole process, the whole focus? What are your thoughts on how salespeople should approach upselling within their current customer base, both from an approach perspective and also from an internal discipline perspective? Because this is where salespeople need to activate organizational skills. One of the things I emphasize real quick is there are things you may or may not like in business. It doesn't matter. Like, you may not like email, but if you're just selling mail, you're going to go down. You may not like artificial intelligence or social media, and don't use those tools. You won't compete. So you have to accept the world as it is and use it. So what's your approach in dealing with your sales team with respect to upselling?
We're in an incremental business. So every time I go out or one of my salespeople go out and make a sales call, or if they're on the phone with the customer or any transaction or interaction with the customer, you always want to try to get one thing, something. So if I'm going to go in and make a sales call, I'm looking for one victory. And if you can get one victory in each customer, one victory, it magnifies itself. I'm not a huge Tony Robbins fan, but the one thing Tony Robbins says is if you make a small change incrementally over time, that spreads out and it becomes huge. And same within business. If I could pick up one item every time I go out and make a sales call, just one, then at the end of the week, at the end of the month, it magnifies. 30% increases come easy at that point.
I think you're 100% right. And I think to really do that, because again, I have such respect for sales and I respect salespeople. And this is what I try to get through to my team, that if you're a salesperson, you have to understand that you're in the most important profession. And you're in a profession that a lot of people can't or won't do because they don't want to deal with rejection or whatever. But at the same time, you do have to demand a lot of yourself if you're going to be a great salesperson. You have to take it seriously. I use sports analogies a lot. I think sales is a sport, really, quite frankly. It's a 24/7 sport.
Agreed.
There's an old saying in basketball, which is practice with purpose. Every offseason, Michael Jordan would identify a part of his game that he felt was weak and improve on it. And one of the things I really want to try to get my salespeople to really think about every day is, look, your goal is to be as successful as you possibly can. To do that, you have to love and embrace and welcome doing things that are uncomfortable. Because you might be the greatest fisherman there is. You go out, you close accounts, you move on. You could be leaving 50% of the sale there just because you don't like to do. Or you could be the greatest sort of cultivator of an account. And that can work. And if you can't close, then maybe we will give you accounts. But if you can't close, you want to work on that. If you're not organized, how do you get salespeople to, I guess we're talking about skills development. What's your approach as a sales manager to have consistent and ongoing development of skills, development of mindset?
Yeah. Your greatest success comes from the place where you're the weakest, right? So we always need to look at those areas where we're weak and then build them up. And then you're consistently building up, and then ultimately you're at a higher level. And then somewhere else is going to be weak, and then you build that up. Well, the way I'm doing it with my sales team is I'm putting them through Dale Carnegie, because what I'm finding is a lot of the success that I have with salespeople is confidence. Confidence is everything in sales. Sales is a mind game in a serious way. And if your mind's not right, if you're negative, all it takes is a bad week, and you could have a negative week and you carry it into your customers and they notice right away. It's not good. So the goal of a salesperson is to create an atmosphere conducive to a sale, right? And So your attitude and what you bring to that customer, you want them to feel good when you leave, not terrible. So the worst thing that salespeople do is they go in and they talk about their personal stuff. I got a divorce, the dog peed on my leg, I got a flat tire, right? All those things, terrible. Because guess what? The buyer and the owner of the company, they're dealing with their own stuff.
And it shows a lack of focus. If you're a salesperson, you have to be laser beam focused on your objective 24/7. That you're right. That's mentally weak.
My wife would often say, because people would say, how you doing? I'm great.
Of course, always.
And my wife would say, that's not true. You're not great. I said, yeah, but I'm not telling anybody. They don't need to know my stuff.
100%. What's the point of complaining? Nobody cares anyway. It's true. We'll figure it out. That's a great point. That's a great point.
Create an atmosphere conducive to a sale.
Yes.
And that entails a bunch of things.
Right.
You want to knock down every barrier there is to prevent that customer from.
But at the same time, if you develop the rapport with a prospect or customer and they want to tell you about their dog peeing on their leg, let them go. Cultivate it, listen.
I've had some of the best sales calls I've ever made was not saying a word.
Right.
And just listening to the other person just pour out everything because they're having a terrible time and they needed somebody to talk to.
I think to be great at sales, you really need to cultivate and curate and develop a very rich and focused and purpose-oriented inner life and inner mind. For me, I was a literature major in college, but one of my great interests now is philosophy and reading philosophy. And I've learned quite a bit from what I've read. And I think for salespeople, more than anyone else in business, you really need to understand that you can and you have to create your reality deliberately. You can't just be reactive.
Yeah. Everybody has their thing, right? I have strong faith. I know a lot of successful people do, but you're pulling from something.
Yes.
It's larger than you.
Yes.
And it's a process of becoming humble and learning and becoming a master of your craft.
Yeah.
And a lot of salespeople don't look at sales as that, right? It's in a little bit, in some ways, I think sales is overshadowed or maybe not thought of as such a high profession, right?
Foolishly, a book that really changed my thinking on the whole subject was a book called Sales Management Simplified by this guy, Mike Weinberger. And I got a lot of value out of it, but the most valuable thing I got, which I took action on immediately and I've never stopped, is make sure that your company's culture is one that is aligned with supporting and driving sales. Because you're right. In a lot of companies, they allow the customer service team or the purchasing team or the AR team to view the salespeople as a pain in the ass, which is the dumbest thing you could do. And when I read that paragraph, a light went off in my head. I said, because it's not enough for me to just get these sales guys fired up. I got to make everybody in the company understand we're sales driven and have that culture so that things move to speed. So you're right about what you say there. Everyone who's listening who wants to go in sales and understand that sales is it. So if you're going to go into it and you want to be great, one of the many, many great things about sales is it's a lifelong journey towards self-improvement, self-mastery, personal development. It's everything. You're not just showing in, clocking in, doing something and going home.
Yeah.
And I think that's a big part of what I try to do as a CEO and as a sales manager. And I hope my sales team is getting it. I think they are. What do you think, from a sales perspective, the most important support they need from the customers? In other words, back to my point, okay, I want to be a company that's really driven towards supporting sales. What do you think the sales team needs a lot, or most, if you will, from the company they work for? How can a company be structured and reflect that value of we're supportive of our sales team?
I think they need to understand that the company cares about them and is truly interested in helping them. Our goal is to help our salespeople and help our employees get from point A to point B, whatever that is for them, because it's different for everybody, right? So if you start with that base and your interest is in helping that salesperson, and in my case, my salespeople and my customer service team and the other people around me, get to where they want to be both personally and professionally, point A to point B. And the stories are incredible. We've hired some salespeople that when you look at them when we hired them and you look at them now, the transformations are incredible. And it's so gratifying for me as their leader to see the growth in them, to see how they've transformed into just something completely different than where they were. And if you're doing that, if you're helping your people grow, then your company grows automatically.
I couldn't agree with you more. I think that's a huge part of it. And I think that you want to have a culture that celebrates success, and you want to have a culture that celebrates effort and optimistic mindset. But an optimistic mindset without relentless consistency and hard work, like you said, is nothing.
And you have to be willing to weed out the ones that aren't into the culture, that aren't going to help you to move forward, because what that does is pull you back. Yeah. And as hard as that is to let people go, it's very challenging. It's the most challenging thing that we face. It's essential to continue growth and continue your team chemistry, because
Definitely.
One or two bad apples can ruin your chemistry and tear your team apart.
Well, the worst part of any sales team, in my opinion, the worst attribute in any sales team is someone who goes into sales because they think it gives them the free time and the lack of supervision to goof off. That's the worst. I can handle, if someone's really getting after it and growing their business and wants to grow their business and wants to drive sales higher and is working, I can work with that person in anything. But you find people who have a certain level of talent, they're good, but then they're satisfied. And then they view that the benefit of sales for them is, okay, now I can skirt, now I'm, whereas I'm results oriented. I say to my guys, look, you want to skirt, you want to go to the Bahamas? If you're growing your sales 10% quarter over quarter, I don't care. Call me from France. Don't call me at all. I'll just look at your numbers. But you have to have people that are driven.
Yeah.
And that you can work with. So this has been phenomenal, Mike. I want to ask you one question, but before I do, I want to let everybody know that if they want to reach out to Mike, you can reach him at LinkedIn, and any questions he has, of course, as we mentioned, his podcast, The Toilet Paper Salesman. And what was the name of your book?
Sales Wisdom from a Toilet Paper Salesman.
I like that. I like it straightforward and right there. And that's great.
It's an easy read. 40 chapters. You probably get through it in a couple of days, but it's poignant and it's concise wisdom. It's kind of a guidebook.
Let me ask you this, Mike, to sort of wrap it up, because we have a lot of listeners that are from the food service space, but we have listeners that are just entrepreneurs in general. For someone who's interested in sales, doesn't matter the industry, what one personal habit, you can make two if you'd like, but what one personal habit would you say that it's really important for a salesperson to get into, just in their personal life and their approach to life, that'll really position them well and support them in the career of sales?
That's a hard question.
I mean, I would say for me, I don't mean to cut you off, but I think you have to, for me, it would be exercise and reading. Or education. Some people don't like to read. They want to watch videos.
Right.
But something that's doing that. But, some aspect that, like you talked to before, I mean, for me, sure, faith is the essential thing. That's the most precious thing in my life, is my personal relationship with God. But daily habit, what would you suggest? I want to hear what you think.
I have a routine. I get up, I read in the morning, I watch videos, I cook myself breakfast. I think that routine is important as much as I can. When I'm traveling, it's harder. But I still try to maintain that routine. I'm learning a language. I'm trying to learn Italian. I take, I use Duolingo, right? I do music. I do Italian. So it's those things. It's expanding and continuing to expand. Life is on a hill. You're either going forward or backward. You think it's on a plateau. You want to unpack. You go, oh, great. I made it. I'm good. No, you slide backwards.
Yep.
So you always need to push forward and move forward. And I think the other thing, what I really look for in a salesperson is capacity. Capacity to do a lot of things at the same time. Capacity to juggle balls. Because in sales, there's so many things going on at the same time. You need to have that capacity. Salespeople who struggle are very linear, where they can only do one thing at a time. They have a challenge. Not to say it can't be, anything can be overcome. But the people who can do this and just juggle balls all over the place, and they have a high capacity, tend to do really well in sales, as well as the motivation and some of the other things.
That's actually a really great point, which I hadn't thought of, the high capacity thing, because it's true. You want to be of a temperament and of a mindset, because you do need to do that in sales. You can't get overwhelmed.
Yeah.
Can't get frustrated. Well, Mike, this was really a wonderful conversation. I really enjoyed it, and I really appreciate you coming in and taking the time to speak with me.
It's been a real pleasure. And
Awesome.
I thank you so much.
Thank you, Mike.
Thank you for listening to The Profitable Table, fed by Woolco Foods. Please be sure to rate and review the show on Apple Podcasts or your favorite podcast app. And to learn more about